Hi, my name is Chris Jorgensen. I'm the Director of Communications and Community here at InsideSales.com. I've been with the company for about 4 years now, although in the early days of the company I was also a client. And at that point I saw big things happening and knew I wanted to be a part of it. So in late 2011 I got a call from the CEO, David Elkington, and he simply asked me to come to work for him, and I did. Since that time, I've had a great education in how to help companies accelerate their sales and sell more. I'm going to start today with a conversation about a story that I tell that has 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is systems thinking, Chapter 2, revenue generation, and Chapter 3, continuous improvement. Let's start thinking about systems. So a system is a collection of resources that is designed to consume an input and transform that input into an output. The resources that are typically used are people, processes, and infrastructure. Let me give you a really simple example. Here in our offices in Provo, Utah, we have a vending machine. If I walk up to that vending machine and put in a dollar bill and press A3, I get my favorite sour cream and cheddar potato chips. If on a particular day I'm not feeling so chippy, but rather more like a cookie, I'll put $1.25 into the machine and press F5 instead. Then I get my Mrs. Fields double fudge cookies. So the message here is that if I change the nature of the input into any system, I will also change the nature of the output. But one of the things we learned early on at Inside Sales was that it's not enough to simply change the input or to simply sell infrastructure. I remember the day as a client when what I was looking for was something to automate my dialing processes, and sure enough, the people at Inside Sales helped me implement a dialer. But I also learned really quickly that simply turning on infrastructure or changing the infrastructure was not sufficient to get me to a sustainable increase in my output. What I learned is that I also had to be very consistent in training my people. And it's not just training them one time on how to push buttons, it's training them and getting them to buy into the vision and mission of doing things differently. The other thing I had to do was change processes. When I turned on the dialer, what I learned was that I had much more dialing capacity than I had leads to put in. And so providing additional money into my marketing space to generate leads let me drive success in the system using the tools that Inside Sales provided. So once again, a system is a collection of resources that consumes an input and transforms that input into an output using people, processes, and infrastructure. And in order to have the most dramatic and the most durable change in the output, we have to consider changing not only just the input or the infrastructure, but changing input, training people, modifying processes, and using the infrastructure properly to drive the increase or the change in the output that we're looking for. That's Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is a story of revenue generation in the 21st century. So I was an academic. I was a bureaucrat in higher education for most of my career. What that meant is I'd be given a budget at the beginning of the year. I would spend that budget plus 10% every year and then get called into the dean's office. There would be a very stern conversation. Jorgensen, you've overspent your budget by 10%. To which I would reply, well, yes, I overspent by 10%, but I overshot my revenue projections by 25%. The reply to that was always some sort of pat on the back or acknowledgement that I'd done good work. But there was also always the admonition to never do that again. I was in higher education for 28 years, and essentially that was my cycle. I'd get a budget, overspend by 10%, get called into the office to be chastised. I would acknowledge that not only had I overspent, but that I had overshot my revenue projections by 25% and carried on. Now, as a bureaucrat in higher education, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to work with companies. I did have some great privilege in working with a few large companies, but not nearly to the extent that I've had the experience at Inside Sales. Since coming here and working in the education group, I've had the great opportunity to work with many of the largest companies in the country or even in the world, dealing with software and business services, health insurance, things like that. And along the way, I had the opportunity to work with a company who was in the addiction recovery business. My colleague Gabe Larson and I were called to do 2 days of sales training for these people. One day in Las Vegas and then another day in Nashville, Tennessee. We had plenty of time to prepare, and I'll tell you, we prepared great materials. Gabe is a master at putting together slides. I'm pretty good at putting together content. We worked really hard and came up with what we thought was an amazing one-day sales training. It included everything. We had time management. We had things about how to contact your leads. We talked about how to increase conversion rates and how to handle objections and all of the things that you would want your salespeople to do really well in order to drive revenue. So they flew us to Las Vegas and put us up overnight at the Bellagio Hotel. And just as a side note, if anybody ever offers to pay you to stay at the Bellagio, do it. It's an amazingly beautiful place to stay. We got up the next morning. We were all refreshed and excited to go into our day. We walked into a training room, a typical hotel conference room that held about 60 people. We were introduced and we were all shiny and ready to go, and we launched our slides and we were telling our stories and trying to get the activities to happen. And it was just falling flat. People were shaking their heads. They weren't participating. They weren't answering any of our questions. We just couldn't get anything out of them at all. And we were really kind of frustrated because we're both really pretty decent presenters, and we just couldn't figure out why we couldn't make contact with these people. Well, we got through to lunchtime, and we were scratching our heads trying to figure out what we would do differently when one of the participants approached us and said, "Gabe, Chris, you just don't get it. We're not salespeople. We are rescuers. We don't work with leads. We work with sick people. We don't close deals. We help sick people get into recovery so that they can get their lives back and return to their families. And here you're just giving us all of this sales crap." Well, Gabe and I were pretty taken back by that, so we spent the rest of the lunch period going through all of our materials, fixing them up, getting rid of any mention of sales or lead, and replacing that with rescuer and sick people, and getting into recovery, and sort of fumbled our way through the afternoon and did somewhat better, but it was clear that we had blown the morning by being so focused on sales. We were quite humbled by the experience, so we came back to Provo and put our heads together and rewrote our entire presentation, changed the slides. All the content was basically the same, but we changed our vocabulary so that we knew we were talking to people who were in the addiction recovery industry rather than salespeople. So we got on a plane and flew to Nashville. They put us up at the Quality Inn. Next morning we get up, we go into their offices in Nashville and get ready to present the day. We get started. We have the same level of enthusiasm, but with our newly tuned up content, it just goes fantastically. People are standing up and sitting down. They're answering questions. They're smiling and nodding. And it's just one of those glorious sales training presentation events that we all hope to have at least once in our lifetimes. So we get all the way through until lunchtime, and we're sort of patting ourselves on the back, and we're pretty happy about the way things are going. And then their vice president of sales approaches us and says, "Gabe, Chris, you guys, you just don't get it. We see ourselves as rescuers, working with sick people and getting people into recovery so that they can get their lives back and get returned to their families. But if we don't start behaving more like a sales organization, we'll be out of business in less than a year." It was quite a moment for both Gabe and me, because for Gabe, he got it, that what we'd been asked to do was not cater to rescuers, but to help a company transform its people, its processes, and its infrastructure from an organization that was failing to an organization that would be successful. What I took away from that was that, particularly in the 21st century, there really is only one revenue generation model, and I want to talk about that now. So the revenue generation model consists of 4 different systems: marketing, lead conversion, sales, and client services, or customer success as it's sometimes known. So the question that I'm going to ask and then answer, and I'll follow that pattern as we go: what is the primary input for marketing? In other words, if I go to my marketing group and I say, I want you to double the number of leads that you provide in the coming month, what would the response from the marketing group be? Give me more money. And we all know that money is the primary resource that goes into marketing. Marketing takes that money and transforms it into what the industry calls a marketing qualified lead. Now, I'm going to give you a very specific definition for a marketing qualified lead. A marketing qualified lead is a lead that has a measured and reported probability of becoming a revenue-generating customer. It's important that you tie this marketing qualified lead score not only to whether or not this lead will convert into some sort of opportunity, but whether or not that marketing qualified lead will result in a revenue-generating customer. That marketing qualified lead then becomes the input into the lead conversion system. Now, companies call lead conversion lots of different things. Some people will call it a sales development team or a business development team. It doesn't matter what you call this particular system. It's the job of this system to consume marketing qualified leads and transform those into sales qualified opportunities. Now, I'm going to give you a definition for sales qualified opportunity. A sales qualified opportunity has a measured and reported probability of becoming a revenue-generating customer at a certain time and with a certain value to your company. You'll notice that we add a time and a value to this particular sales qualified opportunity because that's one of the primary differences between being simply a lead and being an opportunity. You'll also notice that I said value to your company, not annual contract value or total contract value, because sometimes you'll have opportunities that have a relatively small contract value, but that have a very large value to your company as you execute a land and expand strategy or other branding strategies. So, a sales qualified opportunity has a measured and reported probability of becoming a revenue-generating customer in a specific amount of time and representing a specific value to your company. So that sales qualified opportunity then becomes the input into your sales organization. Now, on this screen, it's called sales, but this is a very specialized version of sales. It's the job of sales to take sales qualified opportunities and transform them into new clients. In other words, these people are your closers. Lead conversion are your setters. Your salespeople are your closers. I always like to laugh a little bit at salespeople at this point because they're often very, very proud of themselves for having made so much money for the company. But anyone who works in finance can tell you that at this point, we've really only spent money. We haven't actually earned any money in our revenue generation model. Those new clients then become the input into the client services system. And it's your client services or your customer success or whatever you call them, it's their job to transform those new clients into revenue-generating customers. And this is where money comes back in the system. An important thing to note at this point is that at every one of these transformations, we want to measure 4 primary metrics. From money to marketing qualified lead, to marketing qualified lead, to sales qualified opportunity, opportunity to new customer to revenue generating customer. We want to measure the quantity, the quality, the cost, and the time it takes on each one of those transitions. Then it's the job of your operations to make sure that you are maximizing the outputs by increasing the quality and quantity of the outputs from each of the systems, and at the same time reducing the cost and the time. Now, often when you're engaging with us here at InsideSales.com, we won't talk to you about cost because The phenomenon is, if you increase the quality and quantity and reduce the time, then the cost of each transformation will go down just because of the math involved. So that's Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. And now we're going to move on to Chapter 3, Continuous Improvement. Our president and co-founder, Ken Krogh, took a course at a local university called Critical Thinking. In that course, the concept that we're going to talk about next was presented to Ken, and he embraced it. And in fact, Ken describes this as the single most important thing that he ever learned in any of his higher education. It is really just that important. So the continuous improvement cycle begins with a concept of evaluating. So what evaluate means is to just gather data. Let me give you an example. I weigh 35 pounds less today than I did 8 years ago. Now, if I just give you that piece of information and I sort of smile and egg you on, you might feel like you want to congratulate me for having lost 35 pounds. But then that's not the right answer, because at this point we're just gathering data. The next part of the system is where you move to analyzing the data. The proper response to, I've lost 35 pounds in the last 8 years is, well, that's an interesting point of data, but please tell me why or how or what caused you to lose that weight. And if at that point I tell you, well, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and I have a degenerative back disease that makes me take opiates 24/7, which reduces my appetite, and I've lost 35 pounds in the last 8 years, you're going to be much less inclined to want to congratulate me on that particular accomplishment. On the other hand, if I tell you the truth, that bit about type 2 diabetes and degenerative back disease is a lie, but because I'm an educator, I have license to lie as long as I admit to it and have a good reason for doing it. The truth is, 8 years ago, my wife looked at me and said, I don't want to be married to a fat man. And so we bought bicycles and started riding, increasing both of our physical activities, and it's because of the bike riding that I lost that weight over that time. But you can see a data point by itself doesn't mean anything until you begin to ask the questions: who, what, where, when, why, how, so what, who cares? The answers to those questions that you ask during the analysis phase will lead you to design something. Now, if you remember back to Chapter 1, I said that in order to have the maximum change in the output and have that be the most durable, you needed to change essentially everything: inputs, people, processes, infrastructure. But at this point in continuous improvement, we don't want to change everything. We want to identify some small change that we can make in the system, and we want to make that change just good enough for a couple of reasons. If we change too much all at once, we introduce a phenomenon called causal ambiguity. What that means is that if you change too much, then the outputs change. It's very difficult to track back to the change that you made that resulted in the change in your output. The other thing that happens if you work too hard on designing change that's really good or nearly perfect is that you have a very slow cycle continuous improvement. And slow cycle continuous improvement is a spiral into the dungeons. You just don't have time to move that slowly. You need to move very, very quickly. So you gather data, evaluate, ask the questions: what does the data tell me? Based on that, you design some sort of change that's just good enough and is measurable very carefully within your system. Then you implement that change. In other words, you just do it. So that's the continuous improvement cycle. You evaluate, you analyze, you design, you do it, and then you do it again, and again, and again. Now, some companies are afraid of change. At Inside Sales, we absolutely embrace rapid cycle continuous improvement, because what we've learned is that in the 21st century, we have to constantly listen to our customers. We have to constantly evaluate, analyze, and work on the design of our systems in order to keep up with the rapid changes in the markets, in customer demands, and so forth. So, rapid continuous cycle improvement. So those are the three stories. Story number one, systems. A system consumes an input, uses people, processes, and infrastructure to transform that input into an output. Revenue generation in the 21st century consists of 4 primary systems. Marketing consumes money and produces marketing qualified leads. Lead generation consumes marketing qualified leads and transforms them into sales qualified opportunities. Your closers or your salespeople consume sales qualified opportunities and transform them into new customers, new clients, which are consumed by your client success or customer success system to produce revenue generating clients. Then you implement a rapid cycle continuous improvement in order to constantly work on those individual systems, to constantly make changes so that you can continue the growth and the development of the primary output that you want for your business, which is revenue generating customers. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today. If you have questions or if you'd like to learn more about anything we've talked about, please contact us either through the community.insidesales.com website, or you can call someone at our support toll-free number as is listed on the screen right now. So, go out and sell more.